Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We can start now the third panel of today, and it is on accountability and the renewed global partnership. And I'm very pleased that Ms. Amina Mohammad, Special Advisor of the Secretary General on Post-2015 Development Planning, will be moderating this session, the third session. You have the floor, Ms. Mohammad.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a real pleasure to moderate this distinguished panel on accountability and renewed global partnership. It is the last session, so I hope that we'll be able to do justice to ending our dialogues for this first step in the whole process on a loud note that takes us with many, not just back to the other regional dialogues, but also to New York. We have with us today 4 panelists and 1 discussant. I will start by introducing all of them here. We have to my right, His Excellency, Mr. Bekatas Mohammed Sanov. I said I was going to use my name to help me translate that. I hope I haven't massacred it. Is the Vice Minister for Environment and Water Resources in Kazakhstan. His Excellency has served as the co-chair of the inaugural session of the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, and has also chaired the final session of the Commission for Sustainable Development. In Kazakhstan, he has published more than 20 scientific articles and is a patent holder. He has served as the advisor to the Prime Minister, chairman of the State Procurement Agency, and as State Inspector of the Organizational Control Department of the President's Administration. He's also served as Director General of the International Institute of Modern Politics, the Executive Director of the Fund of the First President, and as Director of Institute of World Economy and Policy under the Fund of the First President. He is also the policy focal point on most environment conventions on behalf of Kazakhstan, so I think there's no better a person that crisscrosses the whole range of issues we have for accountability on our sustainable development agenda. You're welcome. To our left, I have His Excellency Ambassador Gayana Chandra Acharya, my colleague, the United Nations Under Secretary General and High Representative for least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island development states. He's had over 29 years of experience in the diplomatic service at the national, regional, and global levels. He's played key roles in several global initiatives and has been a consistent advocate for the interests and concerns of the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. And I can personally attest to that in the United Nations. If anybody on your back for anything, it is Ambassador Acharya, so you're very welcome, Excellency. To my right, Dr. Bhattacharya, Distinguished Fellow, Center for Policy Dialogue and Chair of Southern Voice, is a macroeconomist and a public policy analyst and former ambassador and permanent representative of Bangladesh to the World Trade Organization and the UN offices in Geneva and Vienna. He's involved in many international development networks and has published extensively. He's currently the chair of 2 global initiatives, LDC 4 Monitor and Southern Voices on post-MDG international development goals. Welcome. Last but not least of our panelists, I think today, I don't know what happened, we were all women at one time, but men are trying to take over here. Ms. Marjolaine Nicourt, Senior Policy Advisor at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, where she leads the team working jointly with UNDP to support the global partnership for effective development cooperation. In this capacity, she has been coordinating efforts to monitor the implementation of international commitments on development effectiveness, and she has extensive experience in the region, notably from assignments with DFID of the UK in Cambodia and the UNDP in Vietnam. Welcome, Marjolaine. Then we have our one and only discussant, and it's rightly so that she's a woman of substance. So, Ms. Virginia Dandan, our discussant for this panel, is the United Nations Independent Expert on Human Rights and International Solidarity, the UN Independent Expert on Human Rights and International Solidarity, and has just completed a draft declaration on the right to international solidarity that will be the subject of consultation workshops in the various regions across the globe. An artist, an anthropologist, she has served as a chairperson of the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights for 8 years, from 1999 to 2007, having been a member of the committee for 20 years. She has extensive experience training and doing human rights work at all grassroots and intergovernmental forums, covering almost all dimensions of human rights. So this panel and our distinguished discussant, we certainly have got the right mix for what I hope will be a robust discussion as we come to the end of our one-day dialogue on the accountability for post-2015. I'm going to give as short as possible remarks because I think you've heard lots from me today, but I think it is really important that we end with the underscoring the importance of a renewed global partnership. It's not the first time we've attempted that, and there have been very many lessons learned of what succeeded and what perhaps didn't work so well. And accountability this time is really key, not just as a mechanism to hold us all accountable to another 15-year promise to our people to eradicate extreme poverty, but it is one about bringing governance and accountability front and center to the agenda. And we're happy to see that in the Open Working Group, our member states have taken ownership and the lead on providing a whole goal that looks at peaceful societies, access to justice, and really reinforces the importance of governance. Global partnerships certainly will be, this time, about the political will that we want to galvanize, determining what actions that we will take over the next 15 years. Hopefully, the ownership and the leadership that our member states have taken will not leave us in 2015 thinking through the next 5 years what the next set of goals is all about. We should be landing in our countries in a transition from the MDGs to the next set of goals. And that transition, an important point in our history as we understand that we're moving to a transformative agenda, one that really has not addressed in the past how we integrate three incredibly important dimensions that should leave no one behind. That we get social justice right, that our economies are inclusive, not leaving so many behind, and that we are protecting the planet as we look at our environmental challenges. So in this particular discussion, I hope that we will go from global to local, regional to global, that we'll really look at all the dimensions but focus the global responsibilities that we will need in the partnership that we take up. The context is really tough. The one thing that we haven't heard about today is the context in which we need to execute the next development agenda, one that has huge issues of migration, of conflict, of unemployed youth, of our climate change challenges, which, as we were told earlier today, affect everyone and anyone indiscriminately. But I'm going to add another one to this. I think the context in which we are trying to leave no one behind, most of the discussions today have referred to the arena of democracy. And perhaps what we ought to be asking is, whose and what democracy? It's not every country that is actually in a democracy within which we can apply what we're trying to apply in terms of accountability. So what do we do then? We really need to challenge, as I said earlier today, this is about business unusual. It's not the usual business of the day. We are moving from the conditionality of north-south development to a universal agenda where everyone has to be held account to a degree that we want to get an impact in the lives of eradicating poverty for our over 1 billion. So I hope that we will challenge our panelists as they give their responses to some of the questions that we've put together today. Hope we will start with, to my right, our Vice Minister for Environment and Water Resources. And the question that I have for you, sir, is drawing on the experiences of Kazakhstan, including civil society engagement in particular, could you elaborate on how global commitments to sustainable development may be successful in impacting national accountability frameworks?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Distinguished participants, the issues we're discussing today are of primary importance, and the initiative which has been taken at the international level can certainly be successfully implemented if it is appropriately taken up at the national level and by the political leadership of individual countries and taken on as sine qua non of their implementation of their own national programs. Kazakhstan, right from the start of its existence as an independent state, became a member of the international organizations and has already achieved quite a lot of experience in transforming its own economy and in partnership with other countries who are transiting to the market economy. We have set ourselves very ambitious goals to become a fully fledged member of the developed countries group. So all the activities which we have undertaken have had their effect on our national programs, and they have indeed been of enormous help and support in terms of accountability. For instance, the indicators for the Millennium Development Programme have been implemented in the field tangibly as part of specific programs. And then we have been able to report back to the international organizations which Kazakhstan is a member of or works with on how our implementation of the Millennium Goals is going. Most of these goals have already been achieved in Kazakhstan. Some of them, for objective reasons, are not yet completely fulfilled. As you know, there have been not one but several economic crises, starting with the Asian crisis of 1998 and then the 2008 crisis and the current crisis. All of these have meant that it isn't easy for developing countries like Kazakhstan to successfully implement many of their projects. And here, of course, what is important is that civil society should be involved. Kazakhstan has put a lot of effort as a country which was formerly a totalitarian system to become a multi-party democracy and then develop the non-governmental sector. And we have now a special government program supporting the development of civil society. So as things stand today, the government is implementing special programs financed from the central government's budget, which have been initiated in the NGO sector. And a lot of money is being put into these programs by the central government. There is also special civil society councils set up, for instance, by our Ministry for Water Resources. And then there are other councils too, where NGOs are members of the council, and it means that government representatives can discuss with the civil society partners the content of programs, and it is very important that civil society's views should be taken into account in this way. Also of primary importance is the fact that countries, programs which the country has voluntarily joined, like international treaties, which are binding on those who have signed them. And this too leads to accountability, where each country, under the rules of whichever convention it is, prepares its national reports and its presentations on how the work is going. For instance, the Aarhus Convention, which was signed in the year 2000, but which signed by us in the year 2000, which provides a mechanism for civil society to participate in the decision-making processes for the various different problems which society is tackling. And there are also the individual programs which are being developed by different countries, which are part and parcel of the problems facing the region as a whole. For instance, in Central Asia, we have our Interstate Commission for Sustainable Development and all its programs. And under that commission, there are also regional ecological centers, like the one set up by an initiative of the heads of state of 5 Central Asian states, which collate information, mostly environmental and ecological information. But we also are coordinating development, both in the social sphere, in the economy, and in the environment. It is very hard to achieve sustainable development. And for this, we have adopted a special program for developing industrial innovation, social development, and also we recently adopted a concept paper on the transformation to a green economy. And we consider that these mechanisms, which will lead to the green economy, are also part and parcel of environmental protection. And so through this pathway, we're establishing our regional priorities, and they contain initiatives of this type. And to have this kind of structure means that each country can decide for itself what are its priorities, which international projects are in tune with its national interests, and which programs it will adopt as its own. Within that format, we have each country requiring full accountability in terms of the information which it provides. And important here is the role of the international organizations like the World Bank, UNEP, the Asian Development Bank program, the EBRD programs, those programs which are implemented by international organizations which help Kazakhstan to establish its own program as clearly as possible, with a clear account of which goals, as part of global programs, it is going to make its own. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Clearly here, I think the messages that we're taking away is that right from the very beginning, defining your priorities as they interface with the global demands, but putting right at the very beginning ambitious goals yourselves, that you also pulled in key stakeholders, particularly civil society. I think interesting to see the kind of investments that you made in building those capacities for them to engage. I think later on perhaps a question on how they maintained their independence with so much capacity and investment by government in reporting back would be an interesting response. On that, let me come over to Ambassador Asharia. United Nations. Drawing on your experience, could you elaborate on how a global accountability framework for sustainable development needs to be strengthened to address the development challenges facing countries with special needs, including through a regional accountability mechanism?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amina. Thank you very much for organizing this meeting once again. I'm very happy to be part of this panel. I think yesterday also we talked a lot about the LDCs, LLDCs, and SITS challenges as well as opportunities. I would just like to put that in a context of Sustainable Development Agenda, as I have been asked, and the Global Accountability Framework. And we all know that when we look at the Sustainable Development Agenda, we all have said that it is much, much larger than the MDG, which means that and when we say that we don't want anybody leaving behind, we want a transformative agenda, we want a life of dignity and justice for all, then all the three things that we have talked about has a strong relevance to those who are weakest in the international community and those who are farthest behind everybody else. So putting them on the front and center first would be really critical. Otherwise, we will not have this SDG successful. That is the first thing. The second thing that I would like to stress on is that why we need accountability, I think, to have a coherence, to have the effective implementation of commitments, and to have a strong follow-up and monitoring, and of course, to ensure that there's a common responsibility and accountability for the global issues. And I think the challenges of extreme poverty, challenges of stability, and challenges of sustainable development is our common responsibility. I think that shows that there is a very close, if you like, organic relationship between national accountability and the regional and the global accountability from the perspective of the LDCs. Capacity constraint, resource constraint. These two things are most prominent among all these countries. When you look at the MDG, they already had a huge challenge to face with. Now combine that with the economic growth related challenges and the vulnerability challenges. It is all multiplied by several times in terms of the capacity in having a very integrated and forward-looking strategy, but also capacity in terms of implementation. And therefore, I think when they talk about the LDCs talk about the global partnership, they are looking at all aspects of partnership. Resources comes, one of the most important challenges for the LDCs, LLDCs, and SITs. And therefore, when you talk about the means of implementation, finance, technology talks, when we talk about the sustainability and the green economic path, we have always said that there is an opportunity for these countries to leapfrog some of these stages. But that leapfrogging will not happen without a strong support in terms of the technology for these countries. Same thing with the capacity and institution building. And then, of course, the finance and investment and the development of monitoring capability, including the data revolution that we talk about all the time. Therefore, when they look at the global partnership, they are looking for a very wide global partnership. The third point that we would like to really stress here is that there has been a lot of, in terms of the global partnership, there has been a very strong focus on this vertical type of the accountability. Of course, the developed countries have provided support to the developing countries, what the developing countries are doing, but that there has not been much of the accountability in terms of a right forum with a strategy discussion as well as the implementation discussions between the developed and developing countries in the way that they would like to have a discussion in terms of, I am talking of the comprehensive partnership that we will talk about. So I think there is a need for a mechanism whereby the developed countries as well as the emerging countries, together with all the other countries, sit together, talk about all the issues. I think HLPF would be one of the forum, but I think the DCF has to play a much larger role than what it has been playing. That is a very important aspect. Then finally, I think the role of all the actors will be really critical. When we talk about the role of all actors, if you look at the sustainable development agenda that we are talking about, whether it is about the sustainable patterns of consumption and production, sustainable use of resources, the marine as well as the mineral resources, we have a lot of issues related to the right type of investment and the retention of the value in the country is concerned. That is also a very important agenda for many of the LDCs and SETs. You have to really look at the responsibility and accountability of the big, the private sector as well as the global community. So in the next partnership talk that we have, we must have a multi-stakeholder partnership. Civil society will play a very important role. How do we really make it inclusive? Private sector has to play a very important role because they are the biggest player around the world in terms of ensuring that the next agenda that we have is fully followed through by everyone concerned, including those they are. And then, of course, the foundation and other playing a very important role, but are they also within the framework of the global partnership or not? I think the LDCs, and the SITs are looking for a very highly data intensive, but a formal mechanism where there is a discussion for the comprehensive partnership review, and that is the United Nations, HLPF, that we hope that will take a strong responsibility. I think I will stop at that.
Thank you very much for keeping in time as well, but for reminding us that people have to be at the center and that means of implementation will be key, strengthening existing mechanisms as the DCF, but also paying much more attention to the new mechanisms of the HLPF. And with that, I'd like to turn to my right to Dr. Bhattacharya and ask if you'd like to share your views on key areas in which the participation and the voice of the Global South needs to be strengthened in an effective global accountability framework for sustainable development and taking into account the importance of regional accountability processes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, let me first start by thanking ESCAP for inviting me here today and putting me part of a very distinguished panel. Always good to meet friends and also make new ones whenever you come to this kind of discussions. And I usually join this kind of discussion not so much to get answers, but to formulate the right questions. I think that itself, I'm old enough now to understand that I don't have answers to all the questions. If I get the questions right, that's half of the problem solved. Now let's see about what is happening over here since the morning. The first issue is about this accountability work. And we have heard a lot of aspirational statement that how it should be, how it should look like, and how it should be felt or smelled, and etc. And if you can follow them, and you will see these aspirational statements are quite often what you call the good is the enemy, best is the enemy of the good, because at the end of the day, we have to be a bit more practical, a bit strategic in how we do. We can build a Rolls-Royce for the most countries in the world, but you won't have the road to drive it. You may not have the proper gasoline to fuel it. You may not have the proper driver even, and not to say that the spare parts and the operation and maintenance cost is too high. So let us not think of an accountability issue or a framework which will not work in that way. The guidance what we have got really makes me feel a bit worried about that. So where do we stand at this moment? You see the 4 steps which we are following at this moment. The first is standard setting. The second one is the monitoring. Third one is the accountability. And the fourth one is, of course, the reward and punishment because from the responsiveness. So the issue is that we are talking about the third one whilst we are shaping the first one, and the second one is evolving just now. If you look at the Open Working Group's final outcome document and you will see that how the implementation and global partnership had been put together. This is the first question. Is global partnership and means of implementation are coterminous, if not similar, because this is where you'll have to make them a bit distinguished. And this panel is more about renewed global partnership. So how do you really see the means and the end and how they come together? I need a bit more clarity on that particular point. And with Ambassador Acharya and Honorable Amina Mohammed here, this is one point I would like to see because this had not been clarified. Let me come to the second point. You see the issue of the MDGs, and for that matter, SDGs, are not a binding commitment. So if it is not a binding commitment, how rigorous you can be in terms of your accountability framework? So you cannot really prepare an accountability framework. That is too much of accountability in terms of time. I will invoke my LDC preferences. The issue is that the issue is this: you cannot have a very rigorous, accountable mechanism when your whole implementation is so much voluntary in that sense. So how do you really combine the voluntary mechanisms with with moral suasions and that particular way? And what would be the incentive structure for those who are really reporting themselves much better? Whether the reporting is good or the outcome is good, that's a different question. So how do you really incentivize them? That will be the other question. Let me move to other points. You see this whole issue of international the issues, the forms on vertical, horizontal, and social. The Southern Voice, where does it come most? One, of course, on the vertical point, on the principal-agent relationship which is operating, how do you really bring in this principal-agent relationship is underpinned by asymmetry of knowledge, asymmetry of power relationship, and a deficit in terms of expertise and participation. I think participation, knowledge, information is one of the key inputs where you really get this one going. On the horizontal part, the link is obviously with the enforcement, and I have said a bit on that. The Southern Voice, particularly the non-traditional actors, will come most on social accountability part, not so much as along with the vertical and horizontal. The social part is most important, globally, regionally, and nationally. One of the other points, and I take this one cue from the elements of the framework which was discussed in May, I think so, in New York, and and what I see is that international, if you are at the top of it, the problem with the international, with the SDGs are basically there are lots of things happening in the world which is totally outside the purview of the SDGs. And we know that non-financial resources are so critical for the implementation of the SDGs. Non-financial resources, I mean a good outcome of the Doha round, a good solution on the financial architecture, and international the intellectual property right, which is based on more pro-development in that way. And the climate change conference has to deliver. You cannot really have a sustainable consumption and production issue without resolving it to UNFCCC. So the point is that even if you get an international accountability framework through UN, it is totally without the teeth and the nails in that way. If you come to the regional, the recommendation is peer review. I have heard it since the morning. I think we are over romanticizing the peer review process. Let's go back to Africa and see how many exactly countries have done till now the peer review and whether it is slowing down and how much it has cost. You see how many millions of dollars it has gone in and the outcome and the results, how it has been fallen. I don't have time to elaborate on the critical literature which is happening. The last point on that is the national. I hear that coming on from the parliament. Is electoral politics, having a parliament which really doesn't give rights to the citizens, is the good enough solution? I think this is an oversimplifying a complex reality in the developing countries. Many CSOs were not consulted when the post-MDG national outputs were prepared. And even when the next time it will be also done, there will be loved CSOs and unloved CSOs in the country. We are fully aware how the CSOs are being controlled in terms of financing in certain countries. I cannot name them sitting here, in Africa and in Asia. So I think this over-focusing on the parliament, when we already have an intergovernmental process, I find it a bit embarrassing. You see, the other side of what is accountability from one is embarrassment for others. So naming and shaming possibly is one of the ways to go about. Let me conclude by the last sentence. And this is a quote from Amina Mohammed during the May meeting. Legitimacy of the accountability system. So the quote, the importance is legitimacy, which we have not discussed so much. We have discussed the functional forms, the structures and etc., but the legitimacy has been not there. This is Amina's word. The legitimacy of the accountability system would critically hinge on the ability to persuade, mobilize, and promote trust between the society and the state, and I will also call it between the state, the society in the country, with the global development community. Trust is the main thing. Whatever ways we design our accountability mechanism, if there is no trust, no credibility, nothing will work, and we will really lose our momentum. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That has been useful, and perhaps I'll get involved on the question side a little later. But certainly there has to be a renewed partnership. I hope that we are not looking for a one-size-fits-all. I think that the legitimacy of this whole process is, and the teeth that you talk that aren't there, are actually in the ownership of the agenda. For once, member states have said no prescription. If they own this agenda, it is reflective of what national governments want, then perhaps it's compelling enough for us to say that that's where the teeth come from. But as we said, this is a work in progress, and the one thing that we shouldn't have is the answers, otherwise we're prescribing as well. I think we can take lessons from the experiences, but ultimately we still have a way to go on the accountability in, as you say, a non-legally binding agreement. My final panelist, Ms. Marjolaine Nicod, may I invite you to share some of your main debates at the Mexico Forum on Development Cooperation with regard to strengthening global accountability frameworks, and where have views of member states converged, and on what elements have they disagreed? Could you also provide your insights on possible ways forward, including strengthening regional frameworks?
Excellencies, distinguished representatives, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to speak today. Before presenting briefly the outcomes of the high-level meeting of the Global Partnership in Mexico, I would like to briefly mention what the Global Partnership is all about for those of you who may not be that familiar with the process. The Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation was established in Busan, Korea in 2011 to take over from the so-called aid effectiveness agenda derived from the Paris Declaration and the Accra Agenda for Action, which in turn were also a response to the Monterey Consensus, which recognized that the volume of development resources was not enough. It was also about effective action. So what started as a kind of donor-driven process has now become inclusive of most forms of development cooperation. And this shift in paradigm is a recognition that there are many more actors today, many different forms of cooperation, and aid alone cannot solve all the problems, and aid needs to be taken in a broader context and also must be used more smartly to leverage impact. So the first high-level meeting of the Global Partnership took place in Mexico this year in April, and the meeting mobilized a wide range of stakeholders who reaffirmed their commitments on effective development cooperation and agreed to be held to account for delivering these commitments, regardless whether they are national or local government, parliamentarians, civil society, private sector, foundation, international organizations. As such, the meeting highlighted the particular value of this partnership as one, firstly, a platform where all stakeholders can come together voluntarily for an honest discussion based on evidence, to share lessons learned for improving the way of working together at the country level and identify practical solutions that work. Secondly, it also showed how mechanisms for monitoring the implementation of commitments can be done using developing countries' own data and processes to track progress at the global level. And finally, this also shows the value to have political focus on development partnerships, ensuring that international cooperation is based on country ownership, transparency, and accountability to deliver tangible results. The adoption of a consensus-based communique at the end of the meeting and the launch of about 40 voluntary initiatives show the commitment of a wide range of actors to take the process forward in different ways and to accelerate country-level implementation. In going forward, it will be important to show that these achievements in Mexico are not just about dialogue, but concrete action and better performance in developing countries. In terms of lessons learned for the renewed global partnership, first, a clear lesson is that we all need to know better what we are all responsible for. And we've talked a lot about this earlier today. But in terms of accountability, this also means that there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and different actors may want to report on their efforts in different ways. And within the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, there are already successful examples of different actors coming up with their own ways of reporting on how they implement commitments. For example, we have the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States, which has its own process. We have the CSOs and the Istanbul Principles for CSO Development Effectiveness. And lastly but not least, the philanthropic organizations have also adopted their own principles. Another lesson, which is important, is that the developing country leadership provides the foundation for accountability efforts at all levels when it comes to effective development cooperation. And we've seen efforts to monitor grounded in the developing countries' own mutual accountability frameworks that they've had in place for some time in some countries. And they've been able to use these systems to report on progress. But of course, this requires local systems and good quality data. But one of the lessons as well in this context is that country leadership is very important, but it's not enough, and it's important to have a global framework to provide a reference point and also to provide some incentives for everyone to engage, especially development partners. And of course, regional structures can reinforce the links between the country level and the global level. So to conclude, I would like also to mention a few words on what accountability means in the context of a partnership. I mean, a partnership seen as a kind of marriage somehow. I would challenge the views that basically we need a naming and shaming process. Maybe what's more important is to have a space for dialogue. We need a strong, robust monitoring process, so we need data, but it's not just numbers that count. You need the dialogue and learning to change behavior and mindsets, and you need the space where everyone feels comfortable and trust each other to discuss frankly what works, what doesn't, and how to make things work better. So we need to have a discussion with everyone at the table to discuss how to better work together. And the meeting in Mexico was a good example of how this can take place outside of negotiation processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention, and I would say that we've got lots on the agenda there for real ways of trying to reduce the trust deficit. That's been quite clear. If there's a lesson learned from the MDGs, is the lack of commitments to really make the difference that we thought we would have in achieving them. But I think having addressed some of those lessons, perhaps we have hope and a light at the end of the tunnel. Let me end by asking our discussant, Virginia Dandan, to provide her comments based on the presentations, and you can see they're pretty varied in what we've heard just now. But drawing from your experiences in the field of human rights in the Asia-Pacific, and perhaps, as we're talking about the global arena, identify the three most important lessons learned for a global accountability framework, and comment on other points raised by the panelists from a rights-based development approach. I know this is quite a lot for 5 minutes, but there again, women have been known to do the impossible.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try my best. I have a whole paper on this, but I'm not going to go into this, don't worry. But I do want to stress that the UN Secretary General himself has recognized that the lack of accountability was one of the principal reasons for the shortcomings in meeting the MDGs. Let us not go into this romantic notion that we have actually conquered our MDGs. And the human rights commitments of the Millennium Declaration itself were not translated operationally in the design of the MDGs. So the vision of globalized accountability in the declaration has failed to materialize, despite its emphasis on shared responsibility of the community of states and their accountability to the world's poor. And the MDG process did not incorporate accountability mechanisms whereby the range of national and international decision makers could be held to answer for their actions or inactions regarding those who live in poverty. And I stop with my prepared stuff because what came in a tweet in the previous session, really it kind of not disturbed me, but it compelled me to, and I asked permission from you, if I might sort of go into a small road along the way. And the road is this, the tweet was, how can people hold states accountable on their commitments? And this is one question that has to be really discussed among ourselves, because you also mentioned, Chair, that we're going, from the global to the local and local to the global. But there's no such thing. I'm sorry, but my many years of experience in human rights has shown to me that there's no such thing as going global, from global to the local. There is a very immense ocean between global going to local, because people in the local level don't know what's happening in the global. Their governments make commitments to the Beijing, to the ICPD, to this and to that, and does it ever reach the ears and the awareness and the consciousness of the simplest local peoples? Absolutely not. They don't know anything about the MDGs. Sure, the government officials may have it in mind, but what about people? It's supposed to be a people-centered development. The right to development says so. And how many countries signed up to Beijing? How many countries signed up? Let's just limit it to the Millennium Declaration. And, they like to sort of come and talk about their achievements, when in fact those achievements had nothing to do with their deliberate steps of achieving the Millennium Development Goals. Like, for example, China and India are two of the most economic, the fastest economic growth. Without even the MDGs, they would have grown that much. But, the percentage of people who were lifted out of poverty because of economic growth was actually lifted up by the growth of the economy of just China and India in this region. I don't know about the rest of the world. And it was not the MDGs. I'm sorry to say that. So let us not fool ourselves into thinking that we have accomplished so much in the MDGs. Let us not make that same mistake. First off, in our conversations for the whole day, we've been talking about accountability, and I have accountability coming out of my ears. Are we all talking about the same things? Mine too. Yeah. Yours too. That's right. And you started, and I thank you so much for starting this conversation. Do we understand accountability in the same way? Do we have a consensus? Do governments look at accountability the same way as peoples on the ground look at accountability? Because accountability can take many forms. What accountability are we talking about? Do we have a single consensus of a common understanding of what accountability? I mean, Madam Chair, you have been in conversations with the Open Working Group Do they talk about the meaning? How do we define accountability? How do they define accountability? And if there is one, where did it come from? Has there been a participatory a process by which peoples can express what they how they look at accountability? I know because I work with local grassroots communities, they have their own understanding of what accountability is. Does it ever reach the local officials? No way. Does the local official have their idea of accountability? Yes, from what they hear from the capital and so on. There is this disconnect. So I wonder if that disconnect also applies to the understanding of accountability, one. And how can we ensure, when we talk about global partnerships, a paradigm shift, is it going to be a real transformative shift, or is it going to be just, again, another one of those phrases that after a while translates into self-interest political gains? I'm asking this because in 2000, the Declaration on the Millennium Development Goal was adopted with really beautiful commitments from the states. How come we're still hearing this question? How can people hold states accountable for their commitments? The same commitments that they made in the Millennium Declaration, they will again make. So how are we sure about this so-called global partnership, the new global partnership? What's so new about it? Let's define our terms here so that we know what to expect from our governments. And the commitments that we're talking about from governments, what kind of commitments are those? When they commit something, did they do so with the best interests of the people that they are having in their own country, within their territories? Or is the number one interest merely political, to look good among the community, among nations, so that they will not be named and shamed? And those are the terms that are, sort of ruffling in my mind. And next is when we, as you said, Mr. Bhattacharya, when we said that we need to have trust with each other. I have long said this, government and CSOs need to trust each other so that we can move forward. How does the government build trust? It has to be the government to reach out because it is the one that lost the trust of the CSOs. So there has to be, and the CSOs, I know they're willing to meet the government halfway, but is the government willing to do the same in reciprocity? I'll end here, and I have so many questions, but first, what do we mean by accountability? And second, when we're talking about rights-based approaches, another rhetoric that's the favorite of governments and CSOs alike, do we know what we're talking about when we're talking about rights-based approach to development? Can we define? Yes, I know, I'm done, thank you. So those are my questions.
Okay, that's an incredible amount of energy, and thank you for ending on that. I hope you're going to carry it through to the process that government has reached out to you to begin an accountability dialogue. That's why we're here. So what you've said here is exactly what we want, and we hope that you will take to the country as government reaches out to try to get it right this time. I think what we have said is that the MDGs were never met it. It's unfinished business. But whether the glass is half full or half empty, it is some full, or we would not be here talking about another set of goals. And I think one of the things that has happened this time is member states have, against all odds in Rio, that was not expected, for them to take the lead. So I think that if we give up hope before we've even started, then why are we here? Who are we representing? We're here because we have to make a difference in people's lives. We wouldn't be here talking about this if we didn't want to. And so I'm really pleased at the energy that you brought into how it can't work. But let's hope that we can turn it around and show how it can work, because we have no choice. The implications of not making it work don't bear imagining. That's why we're here. I didn't come to New York from Nigeria, and Nigeria is a big place with problems on all agendas to do this. And so I think that it's important that we grasp whatever opportunity we have, because there are people out there that we represent. I know government's supposed to do their job. They're not doing their job, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But we have to try to do much better than what we've done. I think we've heard 4 things. Country priorities matter. When a country sets its priority and involves civil society, the Vice Minister told us what they did to empower civil society to take that. So there's at least one government that's put one foot right. We're talking about putting the most vulnerable at the center. That's what Ambassador Sharia works for every day of his life. How do we put LDCs at the center of the agenda now? And that's what he works towards seeing in the outcome of the Open Working Group, which isn't finished, by the way. It's still a work in progress. We've heard about from aspirations to reality check. And that's a big one for this discussion today. And then on development cooperation. Again here, are we talking about the rhetoric or the hope for a genuine change? And I think that what we did find, and I'll tell you that 6 months ago, it was almost impossible to hear that there was going to be a financing for development meeting on Monterey. Impossible. Impossible 6 months ago. But today, from the 16th of July, we have a meeting in Addis on financing for development. So there is nothing that's impossible where there is a will and there is a way. And that's the difference in this agenda, is that we have to make that possible. And if we can see these small steps, then we have 15 months to say that we're going to get it right, finally. My apologies. I really did mean local to global and global to local. We have to go from the local up. If countries don't take this agenda, it is not legally binding. It is absolutely not legally binding. But if we have an agenda that is owned by countries, then at least there's a compelling ask for countries to try to achieve that. What we need is a partnership to make it work. On that note, I understand that our interpretation may only last so long, and I would like to make sure that all those that need the interpretation have a say. I'd like to open the floor for some questions. I guess time is much against us, so as precise as we can, as robust the discussion, the naysayers and the ones that think there is hope, please, floor is open. Tackle us. Yes, okay. So let's start with civil society. That's a change, isn't it?
Thank you very much. This is really a good sign of, being accountable to each other. In fact, after listening Ambassador Acharya and Ambassador Bhattacharya and our discussant, in fact, you have hardly left anything for us. In fact, you have covered most of the thing, but I would like to underline and highlight some of the issues that I think very important. As representative of civil society group, I represent LDC Watch and also civil society group here engaging in this process. In fact, if you have a binding commitment, only we can make people accountable. We are talking about voluntary commitment, voluntary goal. So it is very difficult for us to making people accountable to people. And who is accountable to whom? This is very important. In fact, you have highlighted already the issues. If there is a will, there is also a way to address this challenge. I understand that. But you have also mentioned that, everyone and anyone are indiscriminately affected by the problem that we are going to face in the coming days. In fact, coming from LDC, I would like to highlight the fact that there are some people, some countries, some communities are going to be more affected by than others. That is something that we need to really understand when we talk about development goal. In fact, we have a situation of economic smallness. We have countries of 10,000 people. We have countries, somewhere very far from economic center of the world. And we are asking them to compete, come to the open market and compete with everyone equally. You have equal opportunity, but we don't have a level playing field. So if we want to make people accountable, and if we want to talk about accountability issue, we have to really think about how we are going to ensure that people can engage making government and also international community accountable to people. How we are going to make accountable to international financial institution? If we are going to have a framework of, based on the principle of, in fact, it is the principle introduced by UNCTAD, principle on responsible and sovereign lending and borrowing. And we have IPOA, Istanbul Program of Action, and that talks about responsible lending and borrowing by all creditors and debtors. So how we are going to really use this condition in our goal so that we can make accountable. In this voluntary goal, accountability means naming and shaming only, even whether we like it or not. So if it is to do with naming and shaming, we need to really bring people forward. They are the only legitimate group or community who can really ensure their government and international community accountable to each other. We have if you look at the data, this LDCs, small island developing state, our international financial aid is decreasing and debt is increasing. So if you are not able to cancel the debt, total, in fact, civil society would like to argue that total, immediate, and unconditional cancellation of all debt if you want to really address the development challenges faced by the most vulnerable group of countries, most marginalized group of countries. This is where we need development goal, development agenda. And these are the people who should really engage in making accountable to government and also international financial institution. Therefore, last point, I know my time is finished, but I would like to mention one last point. From the 1970s, we have witnessed that we have made several commitments, particularly I'm talking about renewed partnership. So we had 0.7. In 2001, we had special commitment for LDCs. We have witnessed this systematic, gross and systematic violation of our own commitment in the past 4 decades. So therefore, let's devise a framework how we can really don't violate our own commitment, and we urge the international community walk the talk. Put your money where your mouth is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you just did that. So, any more questions? Wow. Lady there.
My name is Rose Kundes. I'm also representing CSOs, and we're part of the Asia-Pacific CSO engagement mechanism. So thank you for offering the space to share. We discuss about what is new in the renewed global partnership among the CSOs. And while the increasing role that South-to-South cooperation has been recognized, this should not be a substitute for North-South cooperation. The main channel by which means of implementation and global partnership has thus far been carried out and should continue to be is based on North-South relations and cooperation. The challenge will be to ensure that the commitment for financing for development is not transferred to South-South cooperation. So on accountability, from experiences of the MDGs, which didn't have clear means of implementation that outlines each stakeholder's responsibilities and mechanisms, it resulted in the lack of progress on Goal 8. So we would like to have proposals to strengthen an accountability framework. One is to establish an open, transparent, and participatory intergovernmental space for oversight, monitoring, and review any partnership developed in the name of sustainable development. Second, to include a reporting mechanism and to continue the peer review mechanism that include the voices of civil society and peer reviews as mentioned in this morning. Thirdly, to utilize the human rights architecture, including treaty bodies, special procedures, including special rapporteurs, and the universal peer review mechanisms as instrument tools for accountability. This renewed partnership asks for governments to complement the United Nations guiding principles on businesses and human rights. And we support the recent decision from the UN Human Rights Commission proceeding toward legally binding obligations for transnational corporations. So lastly, global partnership for development, it must be an agreement between all stakeholders, and that agenda needs to be honest, as you mentioned, genuine and real. So for us, trust, as you mentioned also before, is requiring for us an enabling environment for CSO participation and removing the barriers to access decision-making on these matters and for us to make informed choices. So CSO can only be effective as fully independent development actors. So global partnership should reflect a partnership that's inclusive and include proportional representation of CSOs, including those most marginalized, and in an environment that doesn't allow discrimination based on sex, age, disability, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So thank you very much for offering this space to share.
Thank you very much for those constructive inputs. At least those are takeaways that we can challenge our member states with. I think the one thing that did happen with member states this time was that on each and every goal, the means of implementation was discussed. It was a huge tension between the North and the South, whether it should just remain in one goal or should be discussed across the board. I think one thing that did come out of that was the implications for opening up resources beyond the 0.7. We can talk about the commitments of 0.7. We'd like to target them on LDCs, but we need so much more. And the resources are there. Over and over again, people will tell you how many, where the resources are in the hands of few that can fit a double-decker bus with the rest of the world. I think that we do need to speak much more about those resources. Where are they? Whether they're illicit funds, or we're talking about pension funds, or unlocking other equity to get into this agenda. I think that's what's going to be important as we move forward. Do we have any other responses? I haven't heard any member states. No member states want to be on record as saying that they're going to reduce the trust deficit to ensure that civil society believes we've got a credible pathway to accountability. Okay, civil society, you've got the floor again.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to all the distinguished guests. I wish to bring to your attention that in India, or South Asia for that matter, more than 70% of the population is rural and engaged in agriculture directly or indirectly. These small and medium holder farmers who practice sustenance agriculture and the landless poor live at the threshold of poverty and are already prone to the threats of climate change. We have seen that bilateral and multilateral agreements have made these communities more vulnerable. These international agreements meant for development have marginalized them further, and accountability measures have failed to deliver justice. We thus call for a multilateral trade agreements that embrace the three pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social, and respect the right to food and livelihood security of these communities. Global partnership in the new development agenda must be participatory and inclusive to the very core. Thank you.
That I will carry back to New York, I promise you. Much more to be done. Do we have any takers from government, member states? And I made that great big claim that government is reaching out. But on a very serious note, the fact that we do have accountability dialogues going on, I think, is a step in the right direction. We could have ended up with just the GA dialogue, and we would have closed the whole conversation and come up with a framework that was another prescription. This is the first of the dialogues. It's certainly the first of the regional dialogues. What I hope is that we will be able to take what we have from here to the country level. This is one thing I have heard all of today, is how much this discussion needs to be had at the country level, and maybe it puts countries on notice in terms of the expectations, but the real teeth that we need to make it real. I'm going to close our session by asking our panelists and our discussant to have their 2-minute wish list of how they would like to see this discussion carried forward. Less of a response to those that are there, but really how do we carry this forward in very concrete terms, and perhaps turn it on its head and start with our discussant. Virginia, would you like to start? Your 2-minute wish list.
Thank you. I'll go back to my the positive note that I'm always known for. By the way, today was the exception because I wanted to wake up everybody. Anyway, I still push for a rights-based approach to everything, and the rights-based approach is very simple, really. It's all about equality, non-discrimination, inclusion, participation, attention to vulnerable groups, the rule of law. And you know, you can apply it to people, you can apply it to governments, you can apply it on anything that moves and lives and breathes on this planet. So I really, really urge everyone to look once more at the value of a rights-based approach to the future development goals and to build it in and not just have just one standalone. It has to be integrated, built into all the future sustainable goals. That's one. And another one, and this I address to the organizers of this consultation workshop, in particular to the UNDG. I think it's time that it should come out of the shelf, as it were, and actually push for a human rights-based approach to whatever is going to be discussed, and that should be the contribution. It should organize once more something like this, and this time to really target rights-based approach to the agenda past 2015. And thank you very much, Chair, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Dr. Bhattacharya, would you like to?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I thought that the conversation was just beginning. Yes. And that's how it happens when you have the full day and you come to the final session and you think you just got the right questions and you have to go home. Anyway, one problem and two suggestions. You see, I have a very simple question regarding this accountability framework. We had the national ownership, regional peer reviews, and then these renewed global partnership. I don't know why it is renewed, not substantive, not enhanced, not strengthened, but it is renewed. Okay. The issue is, where does the fulcrum or the pivot of the accountability lies? Is it between the citizens and the national government? Is it between the governments and the regional organization? Or is it between the governments and the global framework? You see, we'll have to clarify where it cannot be everywhere. It has to be somewhere. It has to be defined that whether it is a regional fulcrum or a pivotal or a national or a global. For me, in order to be accountable as a citizen, to make my government accountable, I don't need to go to New York. I can do it in my own capital. Why do I go to New York to look for accountability for my government or for the region? If I go to New York, there might be at least three reasons I would like to explain. One, there are problems which are common to everybody, so we are going to put our strength together and we are going to solve them. Number two, there are problems which has been created by others but not done by me. They should solve it. And number three, I'm trying to solve my own problems. Give me a helping hand. I see these three reasons for going to New York. So at the end of the day, for me, the fulcrum and the pivot of this accountability rise in the global partnership. Otherwise, the rest of the things we are doing anyway. So my point is, that is where we will have to work it out, whether the accountability process of the strengthened with the global and the rest of the part is strengthened or not. So let us not confuse always with our accountability of our government, even under the guise of ownership, that it is the same thing about what is happening in New York or elsewhere in Bangkok or Nairobi. On the two other suggestions, one is that, you have seen that open working group outcome. And the last one, 169 targets, under 17 goals. My network, Southern Voice on Post-MDG, is doing a dry run of data test in 8 countries in the world. And according to our first cursory look, we are doing it at the national data mapping at this moment, but first our cursory look, less than 50% of those 169 do not have data in our country level. There are no data on that, no information on that, and we are going to report on that, what accountability we are talking about. And just imagine another 200, couple of hundreds indicators are going to come there where you will have no data at all. Either we are going to invest something over there or not in that, or you forget about accountability. So accountability starts with transparency, and the transparency is information, and information is efficiency. And that is the cycle we are talking about, the virtuous cycle of accountability. So my point is that if there is £1 to be spared, put it in information generation, put it in data collection, and national capacities in that in the line with the rest of the thing. My second point suggestion, this is the closing one. You see, Since I'm 92 years old, nowadays I do not make too much of aspirational statements. That's why I'm being very practical and reality check what I'm talking about. Designing a Rolls-Royce will not make the game. We can make a Rolls-Royce, but it will not run. So we will have to be very strategic in our intervention. So what I'm talking about is spotlighting. Spotlights, whether it is name or shame, whether it is a space for dialogue, as my colleague from OECD said, that is what is all about, spotlights. How do you do a spotlights? What is the new thing we are talking about? Do something more than the intergovernmental review process in New York. Don't make another review mechanism which is beholden to the intergovernmental process. Create an independent review mechanism which is not beholden to the UN process. You cannot really be the judge and the jury and the accused at the same time. You'll have to create that, take out the conflict of interest out from there. That is one of the problems with the peer review mechanism, the conflict of interest in the thing. So if there is a new global partnership, my urge is that create independent spotlight mechanism based on better data, better information, and obviously with the focus on the global partnership over there. Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you. See, now we're talking. Marjolaine, you'd have the floor.
Yeah, I would like to come back to the notion of accountability, and I very much agreed with the last intervention. And I think it's a combination of different complementary tools, and we need to see what works best. But accountability very often is reduced to monitoring, but monitoring, it should not start and stop with monitoring. It should be about responsibility to learn and improve, first to implement and then learn and improve. And then the monitoring would be about putting things in the spotlight.
That was short and sweet. Okay, Ambassador Acharya.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of points have already come out here in terms of the need for a very robust, if I may say, the global accountability mechanism. I think it is very clear, especially when you look at the impact. I mean, I would just like to stress, Madame Gina was talking about the role of MDG. Maybe many of the countries have not really had MDG as a goal, but in terms of the sensitization and in terms of the acceleration of the work, let us say, on maternal mortality, on child mortality, on gender empowerment, especially in the LLDCs and SIDS, I think MDG has made a lot of impact, I can tell you very frankly, in terms of really putting the global partnership together and creating national institutions to focus on that. I mean, I would not say that in every area there has been a lot of progress, but I would say a lot of contribution has been made on that. I think that's why I think the global approach, sustainable development goal will have a lot of impact if only when there is a very strong national leadership, national strategy, national implementation plan supported by equally strong global partnership. It differs from country to country, I fully agree. But again, I think that is a very important issue that we have to take in mind, I believe. It has to be inclusive of all actors because, secondly, I think, because whether good or bad, there is no difference between local and global these days. There are many issues which depend a lot at the national level based on what the global framework you are in. Whether it is a trade, if you cannot really have a very strong productive capacity built up if the market access is not better for your goods. Same thing with the climate change, same thing with the operation of many of the transnational corporations. And how do you do that? If you have a global framework, I hope that that will really push the national capacity to deal with these global issues. Then the comprehensiveness of our approach. I think this is a very important issue that we are looking at, integrated and comprehensiveness. I think this is the whole purpose of having a sustainable development goal. We can discuss about poverty, we can discuss about natural resources, but we need to discuss them together. That is what we want to do. I think we want to see that, especially when you look at the countries. I think there was a reference to the large majority of the people in the LDCs, LLDC and CIS being in the rural area. Look at their challenges. They are very close to the nature. They live on a day-to-day basis closer to the nature. For them, I think the protection of natural capital is part of really being in the place and getting out of the poverty status. Now, the protection of water resources, protection of the land, and all of that has to be part of the poverty elevation agenda. It cannot be separate from that. That's why I think the comprehensiveness of that approach is really critical indeed, and this is what we are trying. We hope that we'll be getting it right this time around through the Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. There is hope. Last but not least, erstwhile member state vice.
The government has the last word.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that in any process it's important to see both sides. And we are talking about improving accountability of national governments. We should not forget that national governments are governed by national interests and resolve issues on the basis of whatever possibilities are available. So the resolution of problems also has to do with economic growth in a country, and this impacts on how a country can deal with the obstacles. So the national level of development, I think, is very important here. To what extent it also depends on the commitment of the national government, and it depends also on support from international organizations. In the example of Kazakhstan, we see very clearly that if initiatives on this or that issue are taken up, if we get enough technical assistance, in particular for expertise and capacity building and financial resources, then we can very successfully overcome the problem. If a country has an intention but not the potential, not the wherewithal, then the accountability aspect is much more difficult to implement. The MDGs were a very useful set of targets, made it possible for each country to work out its own strategy. In the case of Kazakhstan, I can say that virtually all the goals that were defined were taken on board by us in the form of this or that government program. We did not achieve everything because not everything depended on the efforts that could be deployed by the national government. We live in an interconnected world and we depend on the help of others too. So if we have a mechanism where we have very close interactions between national interests and where there is support from the international level, then I'm confident that we can implement the goals, we can achieve the goals that are established at the global level. It's the combination of the local and the global that can be the precondition for success in each one of our countries. I'm convinced of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not going to be able to do justice to try to bring this all together. I hope that ESCAP will be able to do that for us. I will reiterate that member states asked the Secretary General for this to go out to the regions, and I think that that is a good sign. What I think we have completed today is we've begun to get uncomfortable. We've gone past the diplomacy, and I think that that's what we've heard in this last session, is that everyone's on notice to try to make an accountability framework real, genuine, in an area where we're going to have a framework that's not legally binding. What is legally binding are our constitutions at the country level. It's national interest, it's our nations, our governments who are supposed to be accountable to people. The United Nations gives us a platform where voices can be heard where they wouldn't otherwise be heard. I can say that in my country, when I handled $1 billion a year of debt relief, that the one thing it did was we decided to focus it on the MDGs. Why did we decide to do that? The problems we had were beyond $1 billion a year. But with $1 billion, we focused on the MDGs. 40 million people got access to water, and we know that not because government said so, civil society said so. So there are possibilities, and I think that's what we need to look for, and that's what we need to make happen. I'm really happy that we've been able to start this on a really good footing. I think that we will need to go to the country level, and when we go to the country level, I hope we will not stop at the capitals, that we will go to the local level. And for that, I want to thank ESCAP for having such a large contingent of civil society in this room. This is how it should be in every room, when in fact we have more people speaking from civil society than member states. In most instances, civil society say they don't have a voice because member states haven't opened it up. Today, civil society had their day. And I'm certainly going to take back a lot of what you've had to say to New York, but I hope that you will take it to country levels, that you will use the platforms where possible of the UN, but especially countries, to get this right. It is about having inclusive society. It's about Nauru and 10,000 people. I won't even say citizens, because as the human rights people said to me, not everyone is a citizen anymore. There are so many people that don't have nationalities anymore. They are migrants that are forced. So I'll talk about people. The 10,000 people in Nauru is a litmus test for us, saying, how can we bring them in? We're not asking them to compete or go there. They need a leg up. So who's going to give them that? That's part of the accountability to a common humanity and a common destiny. If it really is common, then we're going to look for the wherewithal to make that happen. It leaves me nothing less than to say thank you so much for being part of this and letting me be a part of it. Thank you, Shamshad, and your team for giving the opportunity. Thank you, the interpreters who have gone past their time. And
Thank you for acknowledging us, Madam Chair.
To the one lady who's been known to, I think, present us with the evidence of Goal 9 and accountability in Mongolia. So back to our chair. Thank you.
Yes. It was very interesting and enticing session. Thank you very much to all the panelists, and also thank you very much for moderating the sessions, Ms. Akhtar, but also Ms. Mohammed. And unless there are announcements from the MC, so you can make an announcement. But meanwhile, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning for the session, which should be also very interesting, Innovations and Partnership for the Future We Want, the role of the private sector.